Good morning and welcome to Engaging Young Adults in Prevention Planning and Implementation with Melissa Moore. This presentation was prepared for the Great Lakes PTTC under a cooperative agreement from the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration, or SAMHSA. The opinions expressed in this webinar are the views of the speakers and do not reflect the official position of the Department of Health and Human Services. The PTTC believes that words matter and uses affirming language in all activities. Thank you for joining us. I have a few housekeeping items. If you have technical issues, please individually message Rebecca Buller, Jen Winslow, or Alyssa Kuala in the chat section at the bottom of your screen, and we will be happy to assist you. If captions or live transcript would be helpful, please use your Zoom toolbar near the bottom of your screen to enable by going into the More section, select Captions, and Show Captions. If you have questions for the speaker, please put those in the Q&A section at the bottom of the screen, and we will do our best to get those to Melissa. You will be redirected to a link which will lead to a short survey at the end of the presentation, and we would really appreciate it if you could fill it out. It takes about 3 minutes, and it helps us report back to our funders and continue to provide education like this one. Certificates of attendance will be sent out via email to all who attended the session in full, and it can take up to 2 weeks to receive those certificates in your email inbox. If you'd like to know more about what we're doing or information on upcoming events, please see our social media pages. And finally, I'd like to introduce our presenter. Melissa Moore has worked in public health for over 20 years, leading substance abuse prevention and coalition efforts in multiple diverse communities, emphasizing the need to go beyond education to address the factors that contribute to substance abuse. Ms. Moore has helped lead assessment, planning, implementation, and grant writing efforts to transform the way communities tackle this daunting burden. An expert in engagement and communication, Ms. Moore is always looking for opportunities to take great ideas and move them into tangible actions, answering the age-old question, we recognize this is an issue. Now, what can we do about it? And now I'll turn things over to Melissa.
Hey everyone, thanks for joining me for some tips for engaging our young adults in our prevention efforts. I'm Melissa Moore. I have helped lead prevention efforts in communities in varying sizes over the last 20 plus years through public health. So what I'm going to be sharing with you today is really just the experiences that I've had. And I just encourage you as we go throughout to do some stepping back and do some reflection on what are some things that you can do better, you can improve on, and I really look forward to spending this time with you today. Before getting into it, just a quick note, I don't tend to share my presentations because they're usually quite large. There's usually a lot of photos that are part of it, but there is a Soundbites document available and a number of other resources available at the link that's on your screen right now, as well as if you want to scan the code, you can just open up the file as well. If you have any issues accessing a Google Drive, you can reach out to me and I can get them to you in a different manner. But by scanning the code or being connected, you're going to get so many resources that I hope you'll find beneficial. And should you have any lingering questions or concern, my contact information will be available, as well as my contact information is included within this drive. So before we get started, I just want to point out this activation warning. What we're going to be going through today, what you're going to learn may shine a light on some mistakes that you've made or been a part of. I can tell you that after 20 plus years of community work, I continue to learn and grow every day, and I look forward to learning and growing and being a part of this conversation with you over the next about 75 minutes or so. I invite you to share your experiences through the different channels that are available through Zoom, as well as share them with me with the contact information that's available. As this is a recording, it is going to be obviously hard to share your experiences in the chat or through the Q&A, but we're always responsive to be able to work with you. And again, I'm just going to go back to make sure that this is a slide that you want to share, you want to take a snapshot of, you want to open up that resource, because that's what's going to help connect you to what it is that's being referenced here today. Because we most likely all have been part of a fail. But it has a lot to do with what we experience is what really makes us better. And I just encourage you to give yourself grace. Maya Angelou said, do the best you can until you know better. Then when you know better, do better. Really, when we look at our volunteerism, finding the right mix of volunteers for local prevention efforts can be tricky. Nobody wants to waste valuable time or resources, but we are left with a series of questions as we look to involve the next generation of leaders, including our young adults, ages around, again, 18 to 25, throughout our strategic prevention framework, or SPIF process. What's their incentives? Who are their connections? Where is their help most needed? How do we bring them into the fold? During this session, we will hopefully go beyond wishing and hoping and dreaming that our strategies are sticky enough to move Gen Z and others to join our prevention efforts. So today's goals, we're going to start out with just a little bit about why people and relationships are important in our sustainability goals. We're also going to define authentic community engagement, which is a term or a set of principles that was put out a few years ago through the Minnesota Department of Health. We're then going to get into some examples of what motivates young adults to engage in local efforts. And lastly, we're going to identify some action steps to recruit, retain, and re-engage young adults in coalition work. I call that the 3 R's. And we're going to start with some basic reasoning on why we need to engage our young people, because it is such an important piece and what's sometimes missed. I can tell you at 43, I acknowledge I'm a wee bit out of this select group, but I'll share some of the data and information that's available to motivate Gen Z into community work. So let's go ahead and get started into this program today. We are all asked to do more with less. I'm sure if I went around our Zoom room and just had people put their hands up, we'd see a lot of hands. And coalitions, though, are a great way to engage a group of volunteers, of like-minded people working together to have a great impact. On the basic, coalition work, as you can see here in this slide, defines coalitions as a group of individuals or organizations coming together for a common purpose to address the needs of the community, needs or concerns of the community. I always joke that the secret ingredient of my success in coalition building was the strengths. If you're familiar with Clifton's strengths or Strength Finder 2.0, it's the stew, the perfect mix of moving people to action through my activator, bringing people in through my woo, and getting the community riled up for change through my communicator strength. But really, for me, it was a shift of mindset. And this image of the hands in a circle really makes it kind of bring true to me again. The shift of mindset from a coalition-centric idea, where our coalition, imagine a wheel, our coalition's in the middle, our partners are our spokes, and the issue is on the outside. It's what brings us together. And Dave Chaffel, I don't know if you've ever heard him speak or not. He's worked with CADCA and is contracted through other organizations as well. He actually was the one that put this in my mind a number of years ago now, where we need to shift from that coalition-centric, putting us in the middle of that wheel, to a community-centric approach. It really opened my eyes to long-term success. So what does that mean? Keeping the issue of substance use, for example, in the middle of that wheel. Our partners as their spokes, continuing to work in the work that they do well. And then the coalition as the outside. It's the thing that's going to keep us moving forward, to hold us together. It is that image when it comes to coalition work that has really helped me understand the importance that I have as a community leader to live in the hub, live in the middle of that wheel, to be connected to the partners and the organizations working on the issues that are going to impact substance use in the community. So what I'm going to, if there's anything that comes out of today, be the hub, my friends, be the hub. But in order for our coalitions to be successful, we need to walk through all the critical parts of the SPIF, for the Strategic Prevention Framework. It's almost like a wash, rinse, repeat cycle. So if you're not familiar with the process, definitely check out the PTTC offerings to increase your skills, your knowledge, and confidence in using them. But there's one piece of the SPIF I would say that is often forgot in all the busy work and grant reporting, and that's sustainability. Even the most seasoned community coalition builders get a little bit sweaty, a little bit stressed over that word, sustainability. And many times when we mention it, we think about things, programs, items, the money aspect of it. But in reality, the relationships, I would argue, is one of the most important functions of sustainability. It's never too early to start planning, to be around for the long haul. And your partners, including our young adults, need to be part of it. This type of planning is often missed or maybe pushed off due to maybe availability of funding now. But when we measure our level of efforts versus our level of impacts, we quickly realize that our mission, the governance of our coalitions, our leadership, our membership, our goals, our funding, our visibility, all lead towards our public support, the investment in which the public has in the work that we do, and the overall feels of the organization for those that are involved or connected to it. We're asking a lot when we ask people to invest in us. One of the great resources that are out there is the Community Toolbox by University of Kansas. That is actually linked at the bottom of the slide. You can also find it within the Google Drive referenced earlier. This toolbox actually will walk you through what needs need to be maintained, like key structures, functions, or the relationship of the coalition that helped get it started in the first place. I also want to point out that anytime you see the blue arrow, as you see here in the upper right-hand corner, it indicates that there's a resource for you that's available to you to download in the Google Drive. For example, with this slide, there's an accompanying handout of a copy of a sustainability plan template that you could use for your efforts that I developed a number of years ago while working with the DFC grant. It really does help lay out the who does what by when to achieve your goals. Check it out. And I would argue that coalition work as defined could also be defined as the definition of insanity by Albert Einstein, doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different result. The very word coalition sometimes makes me check my watch or find the closest exit, because we've all been part of a bad experience. And the thought of, oh, great, another meeting where we come together, talk about the problems, and nothing happens. And then we come back next month and talk about it all over again. Let's just stop the insanity, folks. We can avoid this by being intentional in our initiatives, which will help us thrive and not just survive in the face of adversity. But there's a lot of benefits and some drawbacks to coalitions. They are manageable, though, when we're intentional about our actions, making it a meaningful experience. And those are two words that you're going to hear me say a lot today: intentional and meaningful. So let's make sure we're intentional and meaningful, because let's be honest, it can feel a little bit like we're moving 100 miles an hour, trying to address the next trend, like a game of whack-a-mole, the next, oh no, or they said what? We beat our heads against the wall. This may be how we feel as leaders. This way may be how our coalition feels. We may feel like we're running ahead when we should be stepping back. We maybe feel like we're dragging when we want to get moving. We want the coalition experience to be life-changing, not a burden to our stakeholders. So how we keep people engaged, how do we keep people engaged and our sanity at the same time? Through authentic community engagement, because frustrations, panic, impatience, all these emotions that if we are not intentional, would be like taking a whack-a-mole approach to activities, just hoping that we can make a dent or make things stick. But maybe what ends up happening is it leaves us with crickets anytime we ask for help or feedback or looking for volunteers. So this is something that when we look at authentic community engagement, it's part of us working smarter, not harder. When we work to build strong community coalitions, we can really achieve greatness. But some of the questions that I would have is, so where do you go to find possible investors in the cause? And how do you build that community? Who has similar goals to you? How do you connect, or how do you want to connect with young adults between the ages of 18 and 25? These are all questions to ask yourself before you embark on that recruitment initiative. We want to answer that annoying question, why? So anytime you put it out there, why? Coalition leaders, ask the questions, why? Why are we doing what we do? Or what is the end goal? Because there may be other ways to move about getting things done. But what it comes down to is those invaluable relationships that are made based on the first impressions that we have. We want to start with the handshake, not a handout. Because the first time we meet someone shouldn't be to ask them to do something, if we can help it. We want to build that relationship to maximize our existing relationships to help us achieve the things that we need to achieve. And how and when these conversations take place can set the stage for a long-term engagement. We can't just show up on a college campus, for example, and expect everyone to sign up on our clipboard or visit our table with materials and resources that we feel may help them. We also may not get people to answer our surveys if they don't know what they're going to get out of it. There's nothing worse than being not genuine or upfront with what you're asking. One of the tools that I use often is through the My Power People LLC. The link is here. It's called the Power Prism. And you may have heard of My Power LLC in a different name, the M&R Strategic Services, but this organization has been around for a number of years to work with organizations to prepare them with tools, trainings, coaching to help build their capacity to effectively move things like advocacy, including legislative and community level change. I encourage you to check them out online, and you can see one of their tools, as I said, the Power Prism, in the Google Drive today. But it's not a lifetime commitment. What is it that we need from them now? What is it that we are asking for them to be a part of? Because we want people to buy into our vision, but completing our mission may not be so easy. There are a lot of different ways we can get involved. Do we want them to be advisors to what we're working on? Do we want them to be influencers? Do we want them to be coalition members? Do we want them to be part of our leadership or join our board? But be cautious about acting them to represent their entire group. It's not fair to them, and it won't align with anyone being genuine, or potentially could misalign with values. Because we can't ask a young person that's part of our board, for example, to represent all young people in the community. The best thing to do is to ask the questions. Find short-term projects, use specific asks, utilize what's already happening, be specific, and don't forget to ask them what they're interested in doing. Just because we have a work plan under a grant doesn't mean that everybody wants to be part of the work plan under the grant. So we just want to make sure that we're asking people how it is that they want to be engaged, and recognize that there are many layers of engagement. How do we maximize what we have? What's the best fit for you and them? Because in community work, there's times where we may drive the bus. There's times when we may ride in the bus, and there's times when we may just wave that bus goodbye after we get things up and going. So where do our young adults fit in? At what step in the process do you need their specific skills, their knowledge, their passions? Is it something that is a young adult-led initiative? How can young adults support it? And at what point do you hand it off? Giving the freedom for individuals to take ownership is something that will keep people engaged in the work that you're doing. A good example is alcohol prevention efforts in your coalition. There's a whole generation of young adults who have heard about the risks of excessive drinking, who are choosing not to drink and drive, and have coined the phrase sober curious. Ask yourself, how can you maximize this shift in culture to support your efforts? And at what point do you pull in young adults, if they're not already present, to ask them to arrive at your bus stop to go on this journey with you? So there's a number of tools and resources. This is a second Google Drive that's available for you to be able to access. This drive has a variety of different engagement tools, resources, research, best practice, and ways to get your community involved. And again, this is community of any groupings. In the drive for today's presentation, you'll find some more specific examples to our young adults. But this drive is also included in today's Soundbites document. So again, you have a scan code here. You can scan this code. You can visit this link. This is another whole separate drive that has a plethora of resources for you. Because we know for coalitions to work, relationships matter, opinions matter. Being intentional, there's that word again, we can meet the needs of the community and our partners. We all have great ideas. We all have unique talents. We all have something to contribute. So we want to make sure everyone feels heard, keeping in mind that you know as preventionists, you know what works in prevention. Help guide, don't push as far as the initiatives go. But these are tough issues that we're facing. And, I think that there's a lot of the time when we talk about building relationships, it's not about just running up your volunteer list. It's about engaging the community where they're at, to work with them, not for them or to them. Jim Dyers wrote an excellent article called "We Need Fewer Volunteers and More Community." In it, he defined volunteers as well-intentioned individuals who take time from their daily routine in order to be of service. Versus in communities, on the other hand, it is not a departure from routine. It's a way of life focused on a common good. So when we look at these two different ideas of volunteerism versus community, this really talks or lends itself to how volunteering may be a one-way relationship and someone providing something to someone, assistance to a group, resources or programming to families or individuals. In a community, we recognize that everyone has both needs and gifts. So we're not only asking them what they need, but we're also looking at what are the unique gifts and skills and talents and passions that a community has that can support towards that common goal. What is the mutual relationship that can result? Because by going out into the community, we are hoping to engage. We are able to bring them into the fold for a lasting, meaningful change. And by being authentic and transparent in our intentions, we're going to be able to reach that goal and sustainability of our relationships. Because relationships, we want them to be transformative. We want them to be life-changing, not just a currency or transactional, as put forward here in this quote by the Reverend Dr. William Barber. So before we get into specific populations of focus today, I wanted to just start out with this valuable resource from the Minnesota Department of Health. Who worked with stakeholders to define the principles of authentic community engagement. You can see the link here at the bottom of your slide. You can also visit the Google Drive to get the entire document. These principles are grounded in the CDC's principles of community engagement and help to inform the Public Health Accreditation Board standards and measures. Again, you'll find all of this about this concept in the Soundbites today. So we're going to break this down, but remember, when working in the community, consider this as a set of principles to guide the work rather than a checklist of what should be done. It may be that a few of these are more relevant in a particular effort versus other efforts. So keep your desired audience in mind and feel free to drop any aha moments in some of the reflection pages that are throughout their presentation today, or drop me a line. I'd love to hear from you. So when working in the community, consider these as, again, a set of principles to help guide the work. There are 3 buckets or principles that are recommended under this concept. And this is where we want to go, or compass. It kind of can serve as a compass towards meaningful engagement. So we're going to break these down one at a time. The first is fostering trust and understanding. This is a huge part of any community work, because if people aren't bought into the work, bought into you as a leader, bought into the coalition, bought into the way that you do things, we're not going to be able to achieve that understanding of the community that we're trying to address. So what they recommend is to immerse yourself in the community. Get to know who the players are, whether it's formal or informal. Seek commitment from that community organization or leaders where you're trying to be. But listen deeply. We're given 2 ears and 1 mouth for a reason. Listen and try to uncover some of the community concerns. Allow for those the disparate voices that maybe aren't heard or maybe pushed aside. Bring in as much as you can, whether it's qualitative data, quantitative data, doing some key informant interviews, sitting down and having that cup of coffee. Listen deeply in order to build the foundation for that collaborative action. We also want to recognize that there's different kinds of groups out there, whether we're going to a community-based organization, maybe a local college, a local employer, a local church. There's a number of different places that people or groups that people may be involved in. Recognize that all of these come with their own facets, and understand the historical context of previous attempts at engagement. Maybe these are young people that were part of your coalition once upon a time that maybe fell off because of whatever reason. Maybe they had a bad interaction with individuals that are part of your group or your coalitions. Keeping all those things in mind can help us to notice the assets that this community can bring. What is the power? What are the strengths? What is the base for the work that we do to build capacity in the community as well as within the organization? And the last part of fostering trust and understanding is seeing the differences, recognizing, respect, and appreciate the diversity or differences within or across communities. Intentionally address awareness on the factors that are affecting the ability to participate or exercise the power that they may have. Work with the different experiences to co-create, plan, design, and implement approaches to engage the community. These are all things that are going to create a meaningful, authentic engagement for you. So continuing on the principles of authentic community engagement, the second principle is community-led solutions. And with this, again, going into the Jim Dyer's article, very similar, we want to work with the communities. The goals of authentic engagement is to work with communities, not for or on behalf of them, or to do things to communities. So we want to work within who it is that we're trying to impact, who it is that we're trying to engage. We want to agree to the process in which that looks like. What are the expectations, the values, the purpose? What is the role of each individual organization in the work that we're doing? We want to understand interests of each partner or the community that we are trying to work with. A partnership will benefit all when all partners in the relationship are being able to contribute. We want to allocate resources for community members to be active in participation. So if there's anything that may stand in the way of them being involved, looking at things like stipends or transportation or childcare, how do we reduce those barriers for people to be meaningfully engaged? But we need to make sure that we pay attention to the power balance, because I've been a part of meetings before where the majority of the room were white, I would say middle age, of higher positions within their organization. And we're asking people to come in to talk, to be vulnerable, to talk about their experiences with things like addiction. That can be very intimidating and could be very, it could prevent those individuals that we're trying to bring into the fold to come back. So we want to really make sure that we balance that power, because nobody knows what's best for us than us. And we also want to share that power. We want to give people the opportunity to take ownership. And that goes back to that bus analogy of where can we have people drive these initiatives? And then the last piece is, last two pieces really, I feel, go together, creating the positive experiences for people to be engaged and then recognizing their contributions. A little thank you goes a long way. And the last principle that comes with authentic community engagement, and this is where we want to go. This is the change we want to see. And again, these are all available at the link below, as well as in the Google Drive from today's presentation. We want to leave the community stronger than when we came upon it. And that definition, it may be completely different than, depending on how you see that, how you envision, what does that mean? It could be putting something in, it could be taking something away. It's kind of like that start, stop, continue, or improve kind of QI process. Like, what is it that we want to see for the community? How do we stay in this for the long term? That sustainability piece, again, it's not just about the things or the money. It's about the people that are part of what we have to do or what we're working on. And in the end, it doesn't mean the end of an engagement opportunity or other ways to get involved. So we want people to stay around for the long term. Addressing racism and remembering that self-determination is a right, those really do work hand in hand. How do we exercise cultural humility? And how do we remember and accept that collective self-determination is the responsibility and right of all people in the community? That's a direct quote from that study that's linked at the bottom. We don't know what's best for others. Again, if we want to continue to move forward, we can expect that there will be tension. Partnership, change, there's a storming, there's a norming, there's a performing aspect to all coalition work. Whether you're looking at your leadership group, whether you're looking at your coalitions as a whole, whether you're looking at your interpersonal relationships. Anytime that we see change, we can recognize that there may be some tension, but we need to address those challenges. We need to plan for them. We need to be intentional and strategic. By welcoming new accountabilities or opportunities, we're going to be able to prepare for a new set of goals, a new set of expectations, a new set of people coming in to help share in our vision for the community. All these things contribute to the success of our community. And lastly, by strengthening our relationships, we're going to be able to build power. And there's nothing greater than when, imagine like the geese are coming back into Wisconsin right now where I'm at. The geese are coming back. You always have somebody at the front. When they get tired, someone else will take that lead. And people don't, we're moving all in one direction. There's something so strong about that image and that visual that we want to move forward to create health. And here, I think in community work, we really want to try to save the world one person at a time. I would 100% say I've probably heard that in almost every prevention coalition meeting I've ever been a part of. And these are tough issues we're working on. But in order to be a helpful helper, we need to look at beyond our own needs. How do we, our own grant goals, or even just our own experiences to support people we're trying to engage? It's not about feeling for them. It's about feeling with them. No judgments, great understanding. How do we listen? Again, 2 ears, 1 mouth for a reason. And how do we feel good about it when we get done? So Brene Brown has a short video I'm going to go ahead and share here. You may have seen this before, but I feel this is a good opportunity to remind us that it's not about sympathizing with the experience. It's really about empathizing, because that's how we can build understanding. That's how we can build trust. That's how we can increase the connections or build the connections around those that we're trying to serve. So I'm going to exit out of here. I'm going to stop share. All right, so we're gonna go into our first reflection moment here. Get this back started. I'm sure. Yep. Always. There's just always got to be. It's got to go back and forth. Here we go. So moving past this, Now's the time to pause and reflect. We're just going to pause for a minute. It's going to go really fast. But in addition to the post-event evaluation, I'm also inviting everyone to take some time to reflect on, kind of what you've learned in that section right there. What are some ways that you can look at how you've been engaging people? Have you been doing so authentically? What are some things that you're going to do different? There are 3 questions that will be put into the chat that include what stood out to you as we talked in this first section of our presentation today. Why is this important? And lastly, what are the steps you're going to take in the next 3 months? There's 3 ways, technically 4, I guess, ways that you can do this. There's a Google form that's linked here on this slide. You can scan the code, you can go to the link. There's a fillable reflections document also in the Google Drive for today's presentation that you can use throughout and add any aha moments, quotables, and so on. Or you can just simply write them down. Something for you to look at later. After this time, you can also drop any ideas that you have in the chat or anything that stood out to you. So I'm going to pause for a minute and give you guys some opportunities to reflect.
Melissa, there is a question in the chat of, do you want us to fill out this reflection now? And I'm wondering if they're meaning the Google form.
Yes. There's an opportunity for people to go back in and adjust their reflections, or you can add, because there's kind of 2 different parts of the presentation where there's reflections that you can put out there. So you can put some reflections in now, you can save till later as well. It's completely up to you. It's just an opportunity to kind of look back and what we can do with the information that we have. Good question. So minute goes fast and slow in Zoom world. Hopefully at enough time, like I said, this is something that I think is important as we are leaders to make sure that we continue to ask the questions why we're here. What are we here to do? What are we here to accomplish? Because if we don't reflect, sometimes we miss these things. So today we're going to learn a little bit more about our young adults, 18 to 25. How do we get them in the mix? Because it's not just about the future. It's about investing in the community. It's how and where we say things paired with who and why. But when is the perfect time to do this? And how do we keep the issues on the front and center to engage our young adults in a meaningful way? Because we want to, whether it's engagement or for influence, we want to engage people kind of what ears they're listening with, or what kind of sinks in, because solutions that are achievable or known can help move young adults. It can be driven by the hope that's gained. And again, by engaging our emotions, we can inspire and act, move people with urgency that can lead to their investment. And action is just a step that we want our our audience to take, because it will move to our mission. So making it meaningful, tell the story, share the data, leave people feeling like leave so people feel like they have accomplished something. So I always look at it as where they're at. It could be you're talking to their heads, you're talking to their hearts, or you're talking to their hands. As a natural born activator, I can tell you that for me, it's about the doing. It's the action. If you want to get me involved in your coalition, give me some very specific things that I could take and go, take and move forward. But when we look at maybe our more strategic thinkers, knowing what is the end result, what's the data that we're going to see, what are the outcomes that we can expect. But it's how we're going to feel. If we're talking right to people's hearts, how do we want them to feel when they leave? These are all pieces that really do work together. And again, this is for engagement. This is for if we're trying to influence policy. These are really kind of the buckets that we're trying to move people where they're at. So another way to refer to young adults is the term emerging adults. This term actually came out of a study by Jeffrey Jensen Arnett. He's a PhD in psychology. He interviewed 300 young people ages 18 to 29 in cities across the nation over 5 years, asking them questions about what they wanted to get out of life. So despite differences in things like social backgrounds or economic backgrounds, he found that there were similar answers when he heard from what he heard from his young respondents. So what does it mean to be in the in-between, if you will? When we look at our emerging or young adults, it's really an age of identity exploration. They're deciding who they are, what they want to get out of work, school, love. It's also an age of instability where, those post-high school years, you're looking at repeated residence. For example, if you're at like a college or you're living with friends or you're living with partners, most of the time when we look at when people are kind of settled in, when they feel most stable, it's really looking at, late 20s into their 30s. Again, what I'm sharing here today is not all encompassing. It's not a blanket statement. It's really just when we look at some of the data and information that's out there, these are some of the common threads that we see. The best thing to do, ask your young adults. In this study as well, he found that this is kind of the age of self-focus. So, when you're kind of outside of that routine from home with your family, with schools, you're really trying to figure out what you want to do with your time, what you want to do with your energy, where you want to spend your money. It's kind of a freedom, because at some point there may be constraints, marriage, family, career, there may be things that prohibit that. So you have the ability to focus on yourself there. It's also, like I said, the feeling of in between, where you're kind of an adult or you're considered an adult, but you don't necessarily feel like an adult. You're stepping out into the world and you kind of have one foot back. I remember in my early 20s, there was a regular call to my mother, be like, I don't understand what confectioner's sugar is. And she's like, powdered sugar? Wow. Like that was something that at that point in time, that was big. That saved me from crisis and trying to make something for someone that I cared about. It's also the age of possibilities. Optimism really does reign during young adulthood. Most emerging adults believe that good chances of living better lives maybe than their parents did, or even if they come up with a family that maybe there was a divorce or family strain, they believe that they'll find that lifelong soulmate. There's all these different pieces. And again, this is research that was linked here within the slide. It's also included into your sound bites. But to really just sum up, biologically, psychologically, young adulthood is a period of major change. This is one of the points in our human growth and development that really we see that, whether it's physically how our brain is changing. Those preventionists, you've probably heard about your brain developing into your mid-20s. The last part, good idea, bad idea, risk-taking part of your brain. It is a huge change. We're moving out. We're moving on. We're moving in. And we're moving with a new group of people that are directing us. And for good or bad, bad experiences, good experiences, as a coalition, we could be part of moving people to live within their experience. And that's where that empathy, I think, really comes into play, because, we can't expect people to be perfect. Nobody's perfect, but we can look at how we can learn from those experiences, how we can use those experiences, that pain, that hardship, the good that comes out of, as we move into adulthood. What are some things that we can maximize? How do we utilize the relationships that we have? How do we engage young families in the work that we're doing? What are the goals that we're trying to address? And it really does, fall into our values, because if we're not accountable to values, that really can impact how people engage, how, when, how, if they engage at all, because there may be a conflict here. So it is something to pay attention to, because our values really reflect our right and wrong. They help us grow. They help us develop. They help us create a future that we want. And really, the decisions that we make on the daily reflects our values. And we learn a lot of our values from our families or extended families. That's where some of that is garnered. But we're also can be impacted by the relationships that we have. This could be our friends. This could be, other family members, teachers, people that we work with. So our relationship values, things like openness, trust, generosity, those are all things that also contribute to how we want to engage in the community. And the social values may reflect on how we relate to society. So these are things like justice, freedom, respect, community, responsibility. I tried to illustrate here kind of all the different values with the images, as well as this word cloud that comes from the article that's referenced here by Teresa Mercer of Youth First, which is titled Upholding Values in Today's Society. It's really a great glimpse of the values that our young adults hold. And some of these may be the same as values that you hold as a coalition leader, as your community holds, as your organizations hold. But what these words mean may be different to each and every one of us. So asking the question, what does this mean to you? What is it that drives you? What is it that you want to feel when you're done with the work here today? These are all important pieces, in addition to recognizing kind of where we are at as we were changing in from, our teen years into young adulthood, but then also what are the things that are driving us internally and recognizing that. So in preparing for today's presentation, I came across a few articles that studied, generate what's referred to as Generation Z, which is defined as anybody that's born from the mid-90s to about 2012. And again, this isn't meant to be, a catch-all. I'm not trying to overgeneralize things here. Again, the best thing that you can do is ask the groups that you're working with. But this is just meant to help, usher in that understanding. Whether your family members, your friends, your coworkers, every person has a story to tell. And as we move forward and looking specifically at our Gen Zers, it is something that I just want you guys to keep in mind too. How do we ask those questions? So Roberta Katz is a senior researcher scholar at Stanford Center for Advanced Study of the Behavioral Sciences. In this reference article, she discusses some of what she and her colleagues learned from their extensive research and how Gen Zers, the most diverse generation yet, as how they referred to them, experience and understand the world. So what you see here is this quote of, in summary, a typical Gen Zer is a self-driver who deeply cares about others, strives for a diverse community, is highly collaborative and social, values flexibility, relevance, authenticity, and non-hierarchical leadership. And while dismayed about inherited issues like climate change, has a pragmatic attitude about the work that has to be done to address those issues. I mean, that is a hugely complex and long, obvious, quote from Dr. Katz, but it is something that when I read this, when I was going through, again, some of the research, I found that this article was valuable because it really does pull out some of the things that are value, some of the values that our young adults have today and how that may be different. And I think that, again, when we look at, pulling out different words, what does that mean? What words stand out to you when we talk about this? And how do you see this as a door to open into conversations when engaging our young adults? What are the things that we can potentially do to engage our young adults when we look at these aspects? Because I would have to say that this generation is born to bounce. They are, or be resilient when it comes to adversity. But it's not about comparing adversity. One of the most common phrases I often hear when working in prevention is, when I was a kid, blah, 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 and I turned out fine. Whatever that may be, whether we're talking about substance use, mental health, whether it's talking about, any other social determinant of health out there. And that's one of the things that potentially can break down. But the reality is when, as said here in this quote through the Annie E. Casey Foundation, Gen Z is still growing up. And as they continue to come of age, early signs indicate that they will grow into engaged, conscientious stewards of our world by being socially minded, independent thinkers who recognize their responsibility in shaping a more equitable future for all. How about that as a mission? That is amazingly powerful. And when you look at the Annie Casey Foundation, if you're not familiar, they're actually devoted to developing a brighter future for millions of children and young adults with respect to things like education, economic status, and social and health outcomes. So they actually went through and broke down some more when we look at some of the core characteristics. So again, going back to that previous slide, as well as this, they pulled out different pieces. So again, the link is shared here. It's also included in your sound bites. So you can go read the full article there. But one of the core characteristics that they pointed out or highlighted is the racial diversity. As America's demographic continues to shift, Gen Z, they write, will be the last generation that's predominantly white. They are also less phased than previous generations by differences in things like race, sexual orientation, or religion. Diversity is the norm. If your coalition's working on focusing on diversity, engage your young adults. This is part of what makes them so amazing in community work. There's a lens that is worn here that looks for, it's celebrating differences, not focusing on them. Additionally, this group is looked at as the pioneers of the digital era. Things like technology, social media, think back, based on the number of people that are part here, I'm sure we have a variety of different generational pieces here, but think back when you were 18 to 25. What is it that you had when it comes to things like digital worlds? How is life a little bit different? But when we look at this, even though we have more technology at our fingertips, it helped us broaden our knowledge and make us more proactive. Unfortunately, with that addition of screen time, it can help, or it can compound feelings of things like isolation. It can help, or it can impact things like our social skills. So there is a balance there when it comes to being part of the digital world. Also, when you look at the age that we are now, to this generation, think about what was happening while they were growing up. Think about, what that first decade of the 2000s looked like. In a community or in communities across the country, there was, dealing with things like the economic downturn, what their parents maybe had struggled with during that time, the changes in technology, how we are very right now type of culture. So when we look at being pragmatic or financially minded, it's looking at things sensibly or realistically. Some of the other factors, looking at the mental health challenges, while this is looked at as one of the loneliest generation, and it could be based on our lack of connections due to the increase in things like our digital connections, or the need or the pieces of compare and despair. So when we look at things like social media, how do we measure up next to others? How those things could potentially increase our ability to be able to be meaningfully engaged. We need to recognize the mental health challenges that are out there. But I can also say this is that this generation is more accepting, as I said in the first piece, more of the challenges that we face, are more willing to talk about the challenges that are out there. I mean, you could see it every day in the media. You could see it on the socials about, people responding to or working with organizations that are looking to support our mental health. They're also very savvy. They're more likely to listen to real life people than they are celebrity endorsements. And they're very shrewd in their purchasing in a way that they're going to buy into what is an expression of their values and identity. Use that when you're looking at coalitions. Sell your brand. what is it that you stand for? What does your coalition stand for? And how do you want to engage them? And again, this last piece, no matter what side of the aisle, this article actually says that this generation is seen as more progressive around many of the social issues. And I think that that's another piece that when it comes to things like health, though we don't want it to be political, it sometimes becomes political. So we want to encourage our young adults to be part of those conversations. But it needs to be meaningful, because there's no power for change greater than a community discovering what it cares about. So our last section is looking at the 3 R's: recruitment, retention, and re-engagement. We want to be intentional because nobody wants to waste their time. And remember that, when we look at our prevention efforts, we want to avoid, putting out, this is what I think as facts. We need to work with the communities that we're trying to engage to get the information from them. We need to have patience. So again, I invite you to share your experiences in the chat, ask questions of the group in the Q&A option, but we're just going to go in and dive into these 3 R's. Before we do that, I'll just do a quick check-in. Is there any questions, Rebecca? Or
Yep, there was just one question. It was a while back, but I thought it might be reflected in your sound bites. Someone asked, is there a visual of that community-centered wheel and spoke idea?
I've made one for other presentations, but I'm trying to think if I can figure out if the person wants to reach out to me, I can get you what I've used. But honestly, I feel that this is something that if I was talking to my leadership or coalition, trying to engage different partners, that is something that I will actually draw out as I'm talking to them. So it may be something that as a kind of a artistic exercise to work people through so they can understand that.
All right, well, we'll make sure that as Jenna said, we'll do a follow-up email with all of these links in case you've not gotten them out of the chat. But then folks can follow up if they need to find that information. That's it for, oh, wait a minute, here's a new one just popped in. No, it's the same one. Never mind, go ahead.
All right, perfect. And I just want to put a call out again for those that missed the first portion of today's presentation. Definitely access those sound bites to get the gist of what was missed, or reach out to me if you have any questions. So first, let's talk about recruitment. So I'm not for sure how many of you are familiar with the Forum for Youth Investment. They're a really great resource, which is referenced here. And there is information in the Google Drive that breaks down the importance of a strong outreach strategy, because we want to be intentional, again, intentional, meaningful, transparent. And when we look at these strategies, some of the things that the Forum for Youth Investment point out, there's 3 pieces that they say that they should focus on. Ensure diversity amongst the young adults who are involved. And I would argue for your coalitions, ensure diversity that reflective of your community as well. And not just asking, as mentioned earlier, that it's one person representing an entire group, because nobody fits perfectly into any buckets. So the sheer age factor of 18 to 25, there is no 18 to 25-year-olds. It's not like they're all the same. So just make sure that we're recognizing that diversity. Make sure that it's intentional about creating a revolving door of youth leaders to ensure that where they're putting their energy, when you're recruiting people, they want to know that when they put their efforts into it, their resources, their energy into it, that it's not something that's just going to stop. Make sure we have a revolving door of new people, new energy, new ideas. And that was actually the last piece, where when we look at our recruitment strategies, make sure it balances not only the needs of the issues or the needs of the coalition or the needs under the grant, but also that it can still allow to bring in new people with new ideas. And that's one thing that when we look at an engaging platform or a way to bring in our young adults, we want to make sure all voices are heard, valued, respected. So recruitment, when you look at other things around recruitment in your intentional strategies, and this may be simple, but when I was putting together this presentation, these are all questions that I would ask myself. These are all questions I would ask those that I was working with. Some other points to consider. Use who you know. Recruit through your existing membership. Do you have parents maybe that have children that are in this area or this window of ages? Do you have coworkers maybe that are in the Gen Z group where maybe they're not part of your coalition initiatives, but you can bounce ideas off of them? There's nothing better than using the groups that you're trying to address or work with or focus on. Ask them the questions. Use them as a sounding board. Make that part of your assessment process. And any relationships that would link your work to young adults. We all don't know everyone we need to know, but we all know someone who knows someone we need to know. So look and be intentional with that. Do an assessment of where do young adults gather? Because we don't want to make it so they have to, how do we make them come to us? Are we selling our brand, our initiatives, our values? Versus always, we don't always have to go where people are, but how do we get them to come to us? What is the most meaningful way to engage folks? Also, probably one of the more important things, and I know it's said again, but I will repeat it over and over, plan for specific asks or needs that you have. The more specific, the better. Because if you just say, would you like to be part of my coalition? In the first meeting, they don't get anything out of it, you may not get them back. So be very intentional. And don't forget to recruit early, often, using existing institutions, things like schools, universities, work sites. Remembering back to that, it's a handshake, not a handout. Don't wait until you need something to build those relationships. And I actually really enjoyed this quote or enjoyed this article. Kristen Brooks and Dr. Amy McCune concluded it was a joint report with the 4-H, the USDA, and the U.S. Department of Ag. And in it, they had written, successful programs need to initiate ways for young adults to be involved by performing meaningful roles in decision-making as a way to connect, engage, and impact their communities. And Seamill and Grace in 2017 actually had put out there, which kind of is illustrated by the images here. Engaging with young adults requires incentives and meaningful experiences that will be a benefit to both the organization and to young adults. And here's the example that they give, and this is absolutely brilliant. Instead of spending a few hours at a community kitchen, young adults would rather participate in an initiative to eradicate hunger. When we let that kind of sink in there for a little bit, it's not about just doing, it's about the meaning behind it. So what does this mean for your recruitment efforts? Where can young adults be involved in your planning and implementation process? Ask yourself, how can grants help or hurt this process? So when we look at different grants, like the Drug Free Communities grant, for example, that if you focus very heavily on middle school, high school age, how do we engage our young adults in that work? Or would the young adults like to be engaged in within their own age range or within the greater community? So look at kind of how we do things. What can you do as staff to understand more, or how to move from asking from a donation at time to investing in the community? What does that communication look like to you? And I can't answer those questions for you. I'd be glad to talk to you about it. If you ever want to reach out, we can do some brainstorming. But in recruitment, it's important to ask the questions of what is it that you want them to do. So next up, we have retention. So there's a link here, there's a scan here. This is actually going to bring you to a great resource out of Arizona State University. Here, while it refers to as volunteerism, but again, this could be your coalition members, it's kind of all interchangeable. But volunteer retention is the ability to keep volunteers involved in the organization. Retention of volunteers comes from not only feeling fulfilled when you've done something on the front end, but the hope that if you continue, that that renewed hope or that commitment will continue as it goes forward. So it's important for organizations of all sizes to, through its programs, through its services, that there's so many pieces that retention can do for you. And here's just a list that comes out of, again, Arizona State University. But, we need to look at what motivates people to volunteer and the expectations they have. Because when we retain our volunteers, it helps us save money. It adds value to things that we maybe need to track for grants, or even just talking points of getting people to invest. What is it that people have already bought in when it comes to your coalition work? But that volunteer management needs to be dedicated from the top down, from the bottom up. Because if people don't feel engaged or appreciated, however that appreciation may come, they're less likely to stay engaged. How do we look at the motivations behind it? Is it mission driven? Is it recognition driven? Is it the experiences that they want to get out of it? Using things like orientation. I think sometimes we think about maybe for our board of directors or our leadership, do we do anything for individuals that just want to join our efforts and get involved? Are we doing any sort of refresher trainings or like opportunities for people to grow as a team? Or is it kind of just, okay, you're in the fold and we kind of push them aside and keep continuing to recruit? And this is where I think retention is such an important piece that sometimes we forget about appreciating those that are already part of the work that we're doing. They've already been bought in. Because I said, a little appreciation goes a long way. And Thornton in 2016 defined the social appreciation as providing space and time for volunteers to socialize with each other through recruitment events, or providing things like meals or space, going out and having a coffee. Giving that social ability for social interactions can help retain your volunteers. In Warrington in 2016, mentioned that for the institutional ways to do appreciation, those are some of the things that you probably are already thinking of. Doing things like awards ceremonies, random acts of appreciation, a thank you note here or there, having any sort of, things like gifts or swag or anything like that. I think that's where, when we think about appreciation or recognition, we kind of go there. So have it be a balance of both that social piece and that institutional piece. And again, this is for all ages when it comes to retention, but think of how that applies to our young adults. What is it that they're hoping to get out of this? What is the connections that they may want? For example, somebody new to the community, or somebody maybe that's attending college in a place near you. Having that social appreciation may be a good way for them to meet, to branch out, to make connections within the community. That may be more impactful than doing things like, here's a t-shirt for your time, or here's an award for being involved. So be very intentional when it comes to retention. So, some other points to ponder when we talk about retention, asking again, what are the incentives to keep people engaged? What's keeping them here? If you have coalition members that have been a part of your group for a long time, what's keeping them? Do you have this as part of your partner surveys that you maybe do? If you're not doing partner surveys, start doing them. In that additional drive, the Engage and Engagement drive, which was part of the links that have been shared into the chat, as well as it is on the sound bites as well. There's examples of what those surveys can look like. Ask people, why are we sticking around? Is it because they have to? Because they're getting paid to? Well, how do we maximize that relationship? Remember that it's not just the future, it's about investing again in the community now. I've said it before, I'll say it again. It's not just about the here now. It's how do we engage people to invest? It's not just donating time. Be okay with people dropping in. That's probably one of the hardest things. We have a meeting and there's 5 people at the table this month and you get disheartened. Reach out. How do we maximize the momentum that we have? How do we utilize the relationships where they're at and continue to meet people in a genuine and transparent way? And how do we maintain that trust? Because we know that is so hard to rebuild. So there's the last piece of our 3 R's. We've talked about recruitment, retention, and now we're going to talk about re-engagement. And there's a reason why I put the boomerang here. For many reasons. I mean, if you're familiar with the physics of the boomerang, you just throw it out and it's supposed to come back. I've never perfected it, but I've seen it on a movie once. With that boomerang effect, also you look at, when we talk about young adults, you may have people that come back to your community after they went away for college. So it's kind of a symbolism there as well. But when we look at re-engagement, it's just important to sustainability of your coalition as recruitment and retention. I would say even more so as we come out of the pandemic. Volunteer Hub, again, the link is here, the resources in your sound bites. Volunteer Hub actually has a great list of the top 5 tips to re-engage those who they actually refer to as lapsed volunteers. I kind of like the way that looks because it sounds, because it's not, it feels more positive. But, however you want to look at it, nonprofits who re-engage supporters, they can do so in these 5 things: communicating effectively, keeping online assets up to date. The first one feels kind of self-explanatory. So any communications you send out, whether it's on socials, whether it's through emails, whether it's snail mail, whatever it may be, making sure you're communicating effectively, both in writing and verbally. What is it that you want from people? What is it that you need from them now? Showing appreciation for them as well. Keeping those online assets up to date. Who manages your websites? Do you use websites? Do you just use socials? How often do you use them? Keeping those things up to date could be a great task for any sort of volunteers that maybe have an interest in that. Offering virtual volunteer opportunities if possible. There's a lot of different ways we can get engaged now, especially with the pandemic. It really opened up a lot of doors. Providing volunteers alternative ways to give. So this could be their time, their energy, their funds. And then lastly, hosting those appreciation events. What does that look like? Socially, institutionally? Is it something formal? Is it something informal? Really looking at how do we bring people back into the fold, because maybe not everybody can be on all the time. Whatever circumstance may take them out of it, but re-engaging it. Ask yourselves this when it comes to re-engagement. Where did the youth go that were part of your youth groups? Many of you have youth components to your coalitions. Do you keep their information? Do you know their parents maybe? Depending on the size of your towns, you may know everything about them. You may see them at the store still. How do we re-engage them? Keeping a list of things like mobile numbers or emails, a way to reach out in the future, are all things, tangible things that we can do. I still have the same cell phone I had since I was 19, and I'm 43. So a lot of the time, some of these things are still reliable. Let's try it out. And if people moved away, are there ways to keep them engaged or re-engage them in a virtual space? So things like on social media, email check-ins, other platforms. Do you have any sort of donor or volunteer list that you can draw upon? That's a great project for interns and other volunteers. How do we build that list? And it's a lot easier to stay connected now. And it's a lot easier to stay connected than to try to reestablish those communication lines. I've seen through my years of doing a regular newsletter that those that signed up at a community health fair years ago, I've never seen them since that I know of. They don't necessarily donate money, but I could tell you that they open up those emails, they click within the links. These are all things that we want to make sure we analyze as we look at re-engagement, because these are all measures of pieces where we can really grab onto, because if we have something specific that needs to be done, we're more likely to get some results when we re-engage. And I think one of the times that when we look at our young adults, that not always, it doesn't always have to be social media focused. And I'm guilty of this. I'm like, well, how do we connect? Is it going to have to be through Snap or Instagram or whatever new, my husband calls it TikTok. It is what it is. And that's part of the differences in asking the questions. How do we want to engage our young adults? Joyce Sayers from Triple Pundit actually wrote, as social media sites and engagement tools explode, pinpointing the right avenue for engaging any demographic remains a moving target. Catch someone at the right time and you could gain a lifetime supporter. That article is listed down here below, but she recommends that we place the focus on following on 4 simple, easy to remember points. Connect with people, connect young people to the causes that they care about. Focus on the impacts their engagement will have. Keep the end user in mind. So keeping all those images, the language, all the goals, part of what drives your end user, and meet them where they are. Ask the questions. There is no perfect tool. So finding out from them how to shape the messages, use the best platform. You know, it's not just a drop and run, like put something out on Facebook and hope people will show up. You know, it's being very intentional, what you want, what you need, and how you can give them the freedom to work there. Oh yes, and don't forget to include some sort of social or some sort of evaluation within your socials. So this is the point where I was going to have you guys pause and reflect again. I'm just going to hold this slide here for a second. I'm not going to actually hold for a minute, but what stood out to you again? Why is this conversation important, and what steps are you going to take? These are all things that are going to answer the question because for you, what's in it for me? This is something that you need. This is something that they need. How do we as preventionists make this a community where we're able to be mutually beneficial? When you're not seeing empty seats in the room, when you're not seeing cameras off in the virtual space, when you're not hearing crickets, when you're asking for help or for feedback, as a mentor, you can provide countless reasons why a person should invest in you and your coalition. Be prepared to sell it. Because I've learned that people will never forget. Let me start over. Maya Angelou, love her. I've learned that people will forget what you said, people will forget what you did, but people will never forget how you make them feel. So to sum up, by offering opportunities for meaningful engagement, your coalition members, coalitions can achieve their sustainability goals. We don't always have to draw people into our table, but rather we should look for every opportunity to go out where our desired audience is. No one likes to waste their time. Be intentional in what is actually being asked of your members and cater to their unique values and what they can bring. Recognizing that there's no one size fits all. To attract younger emerging adults, the best way to engage is to ask the questions. What is important to you, and where do you feel you fit in? And lastly, it's important to not only recruit, but also to plan, to retain, and re-engage those that are already brought into your mission. Don't lose them. Keep those communication channels open. So the sound bites, the link's been shared into the chat multiple times throughout the day today. Again, if you have any issues, you can reach out to me. I'd be happy to share any slides that I have with you. Any questions or lingering thoughts that you have, you can utilize those reflections, or we can entertain some questions here if there are any. I know that we have to wrap up, but I just want to share and invite you to get connected to the work that I do through M3. Sign up for the weekly newsletter. I'll leave this up while we do any sort of questions, but I'd be happy to connect with you around this issue, brainstorm, and so on.
Great. Thank you so much, Melissa. I think given our time, I'd like to ask if you'd be willing to maybe answer a few questions in a follow-up email, and I can make sure you get the ones that were put into the Q&A section. At this point, I want to turn things over to Chris with some final moments and updates.
All right, great. Thank you so much. And thank you, Melissa, for all of the incredible information, just so packed with valuable information. And thank you also for all the resources that you're providing in terms of the Google Drive folders. There's great information in there. A few things I wanted to make sure folks know about that are coming up. We have a sustainability planning intensive. I wanted to let you know the course is full. I have gotten a few emails about that, but unfortunately it is filled. We do have Foundations in Substance Misuse Prevention in Higher Education. It's a 9-hour training starting on April 20th, and application is required. And again, you can get to that on our website. We have a training of trainers for that Foundations in Substance Misuse Prevention and Higher Education. So if you're interested in attending that training of trainers, you do have to first attend that 9-hour training so you are familiar with the course. We have a great 1-hour webinar coming up, What is Ripple Effects Mapping, on April 27th. And if you aren't familiar with it, it is a way, it's a method through which you can map your impact, and it's really an engaging and fun way to do it. So if you're interested in learning about that, attend the webinar. And then if at the webinar you find that this is something that you really want to be able to do, there will be a 4-week learning intensive that will follow up on the webinar, so you can learn how to actually do it. We have a Recruit, Hire, Retain, and Promote series. So if you are interested in working on those issues within your organization, highly recommend that you sign up for the webinars. There's going to be 5 weekly webinars starting on April 20th, followed by a Change Leader Academy. And last but not least, we have our next session on deep dive into prevention ethics that will be on May 4th. And this is going to be the second half of the nature of service principle in the Code of Ethics for Prevention. In case you haven't heard yet, we do have a new resource on our website. I hope you all will access. If you go to our homepage, it looks like this. If you go to click on Prevention Portal right there, it will take you to this screen. And actually this screen just got changed yesterday because we added in a new topic of coalition basics. So we will constantly be adding more topics as they're ready to go. And when you click on that screen, what you're going to find is a page that contains information on that topic, on what is it, learn about it, and take action. So we come through all of the various resources that exist out and on the World Wide Web and narrowed it down for folks to get to some of the essential resources about each of these topics. So we hope that you are finding that helpful. Strongly encourage you to follow us on social media, either LinkedIn or Facebook, whatever your preference is. I did just create a post as Melissa was talking with a link to one of the wonderful resources that she led us to. So if you want to go in and check that out, please do that. We're at 98 people for LinkedIn. This is a new social media for us as of a few months ago. So I'd love to get to 100. If anybody wants to go today and get me over 100, for some reason that just feels like it would be a nice thing to do by the end of today. But Facebook, also feel free to follow us and like us so that it will pop up on your newsfeed when we post. With that, just a reminder to fill out the evaluation form that it will take you directly over to once we close out of here. That's the way that we can keep providing free trainings to you all, as well as it provides us valuable information to know what's working well and what's not in these training events. So with that, one more huge thank you to Melissa for the great work that you put into this and all the information you provided today. Rebecca or Melissa, any last words before we log off?
I just want to say, if there's people that had asked about the slides, if people do want information from the slides or specific slides, reach out to me. I'm happy to share them with you. Just got to shoot me an email. So my information is in that drive. Open it up now. Don't miss out. Thank you again for all the love.
All right, thank you. And Rebecca, any last words?
No, I think I'll follow up with an email with these links one more time to everyone who attended today. So thanks for being here.
Bye, everyone. Have a great day.